Andreas, we try to simplify very much this intricate web of alliances and then counter-alliances for our viewers. I'm not sure how well we did. But is this a trademark, if you like, of politics and this conflict in Yemen, the shifting of allegiances, and clearly Ali Abdullah Saleh running out of options, and this last one of his failed?
Yeah, I mean, Yemen has always been defined by a multipolarity on, the local level, on the national level, on the tribal level, religious level. There's so many different levels to this conflict, and I'm always, for someone who researches the region, I think Yemen is the most complex country to understand, if you can ever really understand it, even if you spend time there, because alliances shift so quickly. So even if you do a lot of research into the depth of what's going on in Yemen, you'll realize soon, after 3 or 6 months, things have completely shifted. New actors have appeared on the scene, and they have completely shifted even 180 degrees. What we see with Ali Abdullah Saleh is that's 180 degrees, and it comes somewhat, it was in the making for 4 months, but it kind of came as a shock and as an opportunity for the GCC, especially UAE and Saudi. Now these things shift very quickly, and in that way Yemen has always been more unpredictable than many of the other conflicts that we've seen in the region.
And Majoub, seeing as he was such a major player, such an important man, even when he wasn't officially in office, yes, what does his removal from the scenario actually mean for Yemen, and particularly in terms of the fighting?
I think removing Ali Abdullah Saleh and the vacuum will be left after him will lead to have more concern about the future of fighting in Yemen and who will be the players who will be charged, actually. Because if you look at, we have Houthis now as the main player, but we have also tribal forces. We have Al-Qaeda. We have other forces who are actually on the ground, and they are actually in a way or other contributing to the fighting in Yemen. So Ali Abdullah Saleh was playing maybe a role with the Houthis, maintaining the status quo of what's so-called Yemeni state. But now with his removal or with his killing, I think the status quo itself now is questionable. And more important, I think the Houthis themselves will not be capable to maintain the status quo as it was, because they would need support from another players. And I think for this reason, in the last 2-3 hours, there were more statements from Houthi leaders that they want to be working with the Congress, the political party of the Ali Abdullah Saleh, and they want to be engaged with them as long as they want themselves to do so. So it seems that they want to maintain the status quo because they see it for their interest and to avoid more, I would say, fighting.
And Andreas, the status quo right now is that the Houthis are very strong in the north of the country. Yeah. They have control of the capital, and there is a civil war going on. Is that the immediate future for Yemen?
Absolutely. The immediate future anyway. This war is not going to stop. And I think yesterday, when we were talking about him, Ali Abdullah Saleh, becoming the new joker for the GCC, for Saudi and UAE, we were thinking maybe there is now a way out. Maybe there is some glimmer of hope to at least bring this war to an end, that to this extent that both Saudi and the UAE can say the war is finished. Now, because what has happened, the south is somewhat pacified. There are, as Majoub said, there are infighting between different Al-Qaeda groups. There's still some tribal factions that fight. But for the most part, the UAE have created some sort of stability, even though a very fragile one. But the north is far from it. It has seen a lot of fighting, also because of the intervention and the bombings. But now we see within that coalition that was shaky a huge rift that will now say, even to people within the GPC, which is the party of Ali Abdullah Saleh, which will tell that party now, who do you stand with? Some of them want to continue working with the Houthis, some of them don't, some of them want to create their own a little power hub, because they've been in power for 4 decades. There are people there that don't want to give up power, and they definitely don't want to surrender it to the Houthis if they don't have a share in it. So you have a civil war that will now be exacerbated. The infighting within the immediate environment of Sanaa, the capital, is going to worsen, because now it's street by street, house by house, and more than just 2 factions. There will be loads of different factions trying to maintain their status quo or even increase it.
Now, Majoub, in one of his final acts, Ali Abdullah Saleh made this very controversial statement, didn't he, in which he sort of switched sides basically, and turned coat once too many times, clearly. But he did reach out to the Saudis. The Saudis responded very positively. Has that channel, has that prospect gone away with the removal of Ali Abdullah Saleh?
I think so. I think even before his removal, because the second day when he made that shift towards Saudi Arabia, he actually appeared in media and said, you know, I misunderstood. And he was trying to say, he's tried to outreach to Iran and Hezbollah to fix the relationship with Houthis. So basically, I think the man was suffering from, I would say, you know, a situation where he cannot trust Houthis, and there are no possible alliances so he can work with. So, and he was trying to find out, or you know, someone to work with. And I think for that reason, we saw in a matter of 24 hours shifting to Saudis, then go back to Iran and Hezbollah, and then at the end of 48 hours, he himself was removed.
One of the things that he also said, Andreas, was the fact, and he said this is one of the reasons why he was giving up his alliance with the Houthis, and that was that the people of Sanaa were not happy with the way they were being ruled. He complained bitterly about the style of rule. He said that there was a state within a state, and in fact I think it was one of his officials who made, in a very interesting radio interview, talked about the Houthis conducting business in very similar to the way business is conducted in Iran. He said like a state within a state. I mean, how true is that?
Yes, but how hypocritical of him to say that. I mean, he's a man who created Yemen the way it is today. Everything that's wrong with Yemen is his making, and the Houthis were trying, you know, they have a lot of popular support, especially in the north, particularly within the Zaidi communities, but even across sectarian support. So there are people in Sanaa who are not Zaidi and still support the Houthis. The Houthis are similar like Hezbollah. They were trying to live off a disenfranchised community, and the communities were disenfranchised because of Ali Abdullah Saleh, because of his leadership. And we have to understand Yemen as the poorest, rentiest state in the world. It's a country that always lived from the money that they earned externally. That money was then channeled via the president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, via various ministries to different important players. Some of them were tribal leaders, some were other party leaders. And as long as this redistribution of wealth kind of happened, we had some sort of stability. Now, Yemen, over the last 10 years, 15 years, has gone down an absolute economic crisis. There was no money to be distributed anymore, and that created more instability. And now Ali Abdullah Saleh, and that's the prelude to what happened in 2011. That's the prelude to the Arab Spring. So in many ways, the Houthis were living off that. They knew that there are people who are in need. And of course, if you look at Yemen today, it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. The UN has said so. And obviously, it's very easy to say now for Ali Abdullah Saleh, or to say over the last couple of days, that look how bad things are, and then he put the blame on the Houthis. He's always done that. He's always found a scapegoat, and the Houthis were a scapegoat here to basically pick up the blame that was actually supposed to be directed at him himself and his rule.
So without him, without this immense figure who's been basically in power for the best part of 40 years, what is the state of Yemeni politics in terms of somebody rising to the fore who can perhaps guide the country?
I think Yemen is like, you know, like Libya, like even Egypt, the post-Arab Spring, there was a political vacuum. We don't have a potential of leaders who can run the countries and can have sort of credibility and people they can believe on, because that is the important legacy of authoritarianism in the region, that they actually kill any potential leadership in the society. And Yemen is another case of those, where basically even Abdul Rabb Mansour Hadi, he was, you know, close to Ali Abdullah Saleh, and he actually, I would say that he was sharing with him a lot of, you know, bad politics in Yemen, and he was sharing with him a lot of, you know, decision making about the situation in Yemen, and he's responsible as exactly Abdullah Saleh. And I think you know, there will be a political vacuum in Yemen in terms of leadership, especially with the fact that now Ali Abdullah Saleh and another leader from the GPC is being also killed, and the person, or I think the nephew of Ali Abdullah Saleh, is missing. So there is a political issue now about who will be running you know, the political party, and who will be potential to be actually working with the Houthis, if the Houthis want to work with the GPC, as they say.
And again, we come back to the role of the big players, the big outside players, the GCC members who are currently meeting in Kuwait City. What sort of impact is this likely to have on the involvement of Saudi Arabia, of UAE, and indeed of Iran?
Yes, I think the summit tomorrow is going to be very interesting also because of the ongoing GCC crisis. And a lot of people expected yesterday with Ali Abdullah Saleh being somewhat reinstalled as the president of Yemen de facto, that this would have been a way out for the UAE and Saudi out of a crisis that kind of keeps them busy. Which would have meant that the UAE and Saudi could have gone to Kuwait with a lot more relaxation and with a free mind to actually possibly enter negotiations or put more pressure. Now they're in a situation where the Yemen war is more unpredictable than it has ever been for the last 2.5 years. There's definitely no easy way out of it. And Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed are looking for face-saving measures to get out of the crisis. Now this has now been more complicated than before, which means they have more things on their head entering into the GCC summit, and probably that would probably obstruct some of the dialogue that could have happened if the Yemen war had been closer to a finish line.
And so what's missing? I mean, what's missing in terms of the geopolitics? Because what you need is a highly credible, powerful mediator, interlocutor with leverage.
Yes.
Who can that be?
I don't think the problem is Yemen is one platform where different players are fighting. Yemen, you have to remember that Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, those are three or four places where Iran is fighting with Saudi Arabia, fighting with other players in the region who are actually against Iranian policy. So it's not about Yemen. It's about what different players are doing in the region. The problem is we don't have a credible mediator who can come and bring those people to the table and say, look, this is, you have interest to have stability and security in the region. Let's work together. So far, in the last 117 years, this was the case. The regional players, they failed to work together. Always outsiders, they come and they intervene and they try to solve the matter. When outsiders come to the region, they come with their agenda, with their own interest, and that complicated the whole political scene more and more. And that is the reason why what we saw in Yemen, GCC initiative failed. So we witnessed the intervention of the United Nations. Again, is not making a lot of progress in Yemen. I think what's needed is a credible mediator who can take into consideration that it is the interest of all players to have Yemen stable, secure, and allowing people to have a respected life, not killing thousands of people every day of hunger and other suffering.
Dignified life, yes.
So we're missing this kind of figure, and that is it because of the current incumbent in the White House and the policy muddle that is emanating from Washington?
Yes, I think that there are many factors to it. One is definitely the White House. The White House has made it clear, including the Defense Department, to the Saudis that they can continue this war indefinitely, suggesting that there might be a military solution to a conflict where there is absolutely no military solution. And you know what? The Qataris in 2015 were pressured to go into that coalition, and they said very early on, we don't enter into a war if we don't have a mediator. We're not going to enter into war when we don't have a political way out and a political strategy. And Saudi didn't have a strategy. They still don't have a strategy. Now, the Americans don't have a strategy either. For them, Yemen was always part of the war on terror. They have always had their own little things going on the ground, special operations. The Brits have had their own role in this. But one of the biggest things that terrorism thrives on are ungoverned spaces and failing states. And nobody has really tackled that socio-political, socio-economic problem of Yemen because everybody is trying to secure their own interests. And these interests that the Americans are trying to secure are very short-term interests. They're long-term, you would want to stabilize the country. Nobody has taken that on. And one thing is very important. The Trump administration, with America first, will not want to get dragged into the Middle East into another military intervention. They want the Saudis to do the dirty work for them. They want the GCC to do the dirty work for them, even when it comes to tackling Iran. So the US and the West in general are not very hesitant to get involved in a war in a country which is very similar to Afghanistan, mountainous terrain. It's like the worst nightmare for any military leader in the West.
In addition to that,
Well, with me here in the studio is Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera senior political analyst, and we have Andreas Krieg, assistant professor at the Defence Studies Department of King's College London. Welcome to you both. But Marwan, starting with you, what have we just witnessed?
It's a huge turnaround, a major changing in the history of Yemen. I mean, look, this man, Ali Abdullah Saleh, has ruled Yemen since 1978. For 4 decades, his name has been associated with power politics in Yemen. So an entire Yemeni generation knows only Ali Abdullah Saleh. Even when he was deposed / quit a few years ago, he remained relevant. And he stayed relevant. And he insisted on remaining relevant, even though that meant the death of tens of thousands of Yemenis. So today we just see the end, just like we did, and you and I have been just talking about this earlier. When we look at these images, we can only remember another 4 decades in a different country where a leader died or was killed humiliatingly just like this, Muammar al-Gaddafi in Libya. Another casualty of the Arab Spring or of his own history or decades of repression in Yemen as in Libya. So really, a very, I must say, sad, be that as it may, ending of a man who could have quit politics while he was on the up and up after the Arab Spring allowed him a way out without the humiliation that we see today.
Andreas, it seems very much as though this has been a direct consequence of his decision to break with the Houthi rebel group.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree, this is a tectonic shift in Yemen's history. And I would also say this is very similar to what we saw in Libya. The key aspect here is he's a guy who, similar to Gaddafi, who was able to balance a very tribal society. He was able to balance a very fractured society. He was able to integrate various factions that actually don't really get along. Now, if you take this one out of the equation, we've seen that in Libya, for example, you take Gaddafi out of the equation, as hated as he was able to keep it together. Now, we take him out of the equation in Yemen, we're going back to, and let's not make any mistake, he wasn't away. He was not the president, but he was pulling the strings. Now, moving him out means that we are going back to a state of insecurity and uncertainty and unpredictability in Yemen, where everything can happen. And I think this is very, very dangerous.
But the people of Yemen have endured, 3 years of the most brutal kind of war and conditions resulting from that war. Can they look forward to any brighter prospects as a result of this very important, strong player being removed from the scene?
Yemen is already a failed state. It's a state where there is no central government. The institutions have failed. Most of the structures have failed. The economy has failed. The war has further destroyed the entire country. So I think in the short run we are in for a lot more violence, a lot more. I think in the very short term, I think especially around Sanaa, we will see a lot more fighting, urban warfare, house to house, and that is something that will kill civilians. A lot of civilians will be killed. And long run there is uncertainty, and I think this is where the international community comes in. This is where the GCC comes in. How will regional players deal with what's going on the ground? Because the problem of that is Ali Abdullah Saleh now appeared 72 hours ago as the new joker. He was a new guy that everybody was hailing and said, oh, this is the way out for the Saudis out of a conflict, out of a war they didn't want to be involved in anymore. And now this joker has disappeared, which means how do the Saudis, how do the Emiratis get out of it? And the Emiratis have worked for months and months trying to get him into that position and of basically cancelling that alliance with the Houthis. They have achieved that, and within 72 hours he's dead. Huge strategic failure both for the other 2 GCC countries, the UAE and Saudi. What does that mean for Yemen now? Will they pull out? Probably not. But that's a completely different debate to be had. That's what I was going to put to you.
Political analyst Marwan Bishara and Andreas Krieg as well from London's King College. Thank you both for being here. I want to get to what the Iranian guest there said in just a moment about Iran's future strategy in Yemen. But just for our viewers who are joining us now, I think it's important to pause and talk about how important a moment this is for Yemen, the death of Ali Abdullah Saleh, Marwan. We heard the Houthi leader say just a short while ago that this day is an exceptional and historic day for the Yemeni people. Just how important and dangerous a moment are we at right now?
It's a big moment. It's a turning point on 2 levels, historic and political. Historic because the name of Ali Abdullah Saleh has been associated with Yemen for 4 decades. Since he took over, I think it was 1978, he was basically the ruler/dictator of Yemen for 3.5 decades until he was basically deposed under popular pressure and regional pressure. So the contemporary history of Yemen is associated with Ali Abdullah Saleh and his autocratic rule.
Right.
And his changing of alliances. One day he is with the Saddam Hussein, one day he's against, one day he is for unification of Yemen, then he turns on his allies in the mid-90s. It's a long history of changing alliances and so on and so forth. And Yemen kept on being part and parcel of this changing of the mood and changing within the regional alliances and so on and so forth. All in all, Yemen was stable but was poor. All in all, they discovered oil, but it was in smaller quantities and it didn't really feed in to any sort of prosperity within the country. If anything, under Saleh, we saw more and more of a failure of the state and the rise of Al-Qaeda within Yemen and so on and so forth. Now, politically speaking, of course, this is a whole new picture now in Yemen, since the security situation will change now that Ali Abdullah Saleh is dead, because the Congress party that he led for a number of decades now will probably not be the same. It's already not the same since it's left Sanaa, since it's left being in control of Yemen, because this was what you call a state party. It benefited from being in the state, in the patronage system that it controlled. Today, Ali Abdullah Saleh has gone, its state power is gone, a good part of its ammunitions and whatever it was left that took over from the state, that's gone. So all in all, today, I think there's a bit of a turning the chapter on that. I think the Houthis, with their control of Sanaa and being basically in control, have also lost an important ally.
I was going to ask you this, because we heard Abdul Malik al-Houthi congratulating the Yemeni people and so on. Does the death of Ali Abdullah Saleh make the Houthis stronger or weaker today in today's Yemen?
Well, if you listen to him, and I was just listening to him in Arabic, and he took on the religious grounds, the moral high grounds, and the emotional high grounds. I mean, he really kidnapped the entire scene of the Yemeni political system, blaming the betrayal of Saleh, the moral decay of Saleh and his followers, and so on and so forth, saying that he betrayed us with those who he just called only recently enemies of Yemen, and so on and so forth. So certainly he's weakened, but, and this goes into your interview with our Iranian guest, there's a good number of things we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's probably an open scene now for Iran to say, you know, now that Ali Abdullah Saleh is gone, their real allies is not Ali Abdullah Saleh. Ali Abdullah Saleh at one point, and for a long time, was a Ba'athist. He was ally of Saddam Hussein. He wasn't exactly a pro-Iranian at all. But the Houthis are. And I think now we will see bridges, maybe, between Tehran and Sanaa like we haven't seen before. But that also depends on what the Saudi Arabia is going to do.
That was going to be my next question.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, you talk about, I asked the guests about what Iran's strategy was going to be going ahead in Yemen, but that all depends on what the Saudis do next, doesn't it?
Well, you know, Yemen, like Libya, like Syria, and so on and so forth, is a Yemeni situation, but it's also in a huge way a regional issue. And Yemen could not have been determined in terms of its future without those factors from the outside, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Iran, in the way they played Yemen. Yemen became, whether we like it or not, whether your guest likes it or not, a proxy war. Now, whether the Iranians did, as they are being blamed by their nemesis in the region, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, as having armed the Houthis, and are they being behind the success of the Houthis in taking control of Sanaa, that's maybe a bit exaggerated. But certainly there is support for the Houthis from Iran. So Yemen and Yemen's future is held hostage to these regional configurations, and that's why the importance of diplomacy today could not be underestimated, because there is no military solutions for Yemen. There is no proxy war solution for Yemen. Saudi Arabia is lost today in Yemen, just because it lost an ally, because it's also been losing. And who's gaining? Iran is gaining influence in Yemen.
Andreas, I want to bring you in before you talk about the regional players, because what's happening in Yemen really, I mean, has to do with what's going on in this region as well. just on what Abdul Malik al-Houthi was saying a short while ago, he talked about a new day for the Yemeni people. But is it really? Can Yemenis, with Ali Abdullah Saleh out of the picture, look forward to a better future, or is it actually going to get much, much worse before it gets better?
Absolutely. Is there a Yemeni people? Question mark. You know, can they be united under one flag? I think what we've seen him do is very similar to what Hassan Nasrallah would do in southern Lebanon. You know, trying to rally the people around the flag and saying, you know, we the Yemeni people. Right. You know, making himself look like he's the social political leader, reaching out to everyone, being inclusive. But he's far from it, and he doesn't. He has a lot of social political support domestically, beyond the Zaidi community. But it doesn't mean he can actually speak on behalf of all the Yemenis. So for the time being, there will be infighting. There will be infighting, even
among the Houthis themselves.
Potentially within the Houthis, definitely within the GPC, which is Ali Abdullah Saleh's party. There will be a completely new reshuffle of powers and power players in the country, and that is going to be violent, right? And so that is the short to mid-term. I think we will see a lot more violence before we can see any betterment. And then the question is who, and because it is, as Marwan said, this is a proxy war. Right. What will the international players do there with these proxies on the ground as they're trying to secure their interests? The problem here is that everyone who's involved in Yemen, including all the Yemeni players, are not interested in a coherent, inclusive Yemeni solution. Everybody at the moment is fighting for their own interests. So do the Saudis, so do the Iranians. The Iranians have tried to play on the fact that there are a disenfranchised community within the country, trying to re-enfranchise them to a certain extent, but again, not doing that in an inclusive manner, but in a quite exclusive manner. So whatever comes to the Houthis comes at the expense of other factions within the country.
I asked the guests in Iran how much longer the Iranians would continue to support the Houthis. If the situation does get worse, as a lot of people are predicting, could we see direct involvement from the Iranians and the Saudis possibly?
No, I mean, the Iranians don't fight direct wars. That's not what they do. I mean, their strategy, their military doctrine is all about indirect surrogate warfare. And their surrogates, that's what they've done in Lebanon and Syria, that's what they've done in Iraq. That's what they potentially do in other places in the Gulf as well. So they would never indirectly get involved. They don't need to. They have enough people on the ground, operatives, that, you know, that they
Marwan doesn't agree with you on that.
No, what I mean, there's just been in Iraq and they have been in Syria, but not in a major conventional kind of war.
There's no major combat operation where you see Iranian troops with their batch on and tanks moving into the country. But they don't need to, because they have their own Quds force on the ground. You know, they have thousands of operatives in Syria, thousands of operatives in Iraq, and they have loads of people in Yemen as well who have been training them. But I think there is an important point to be made there, as Marwan said already. The Houthis were empowered by the Republican Guard. They were empowered by the people who were working for Ali Abdullah Saleh. Losing them means they lose some military capability. And that goes also to the ballistic missile system. The ballistic missiles were administered by the Republican Guard. And the Republican Guard were the ones who knew how to do it. The Houthis are guerrilla fighters. They fight in the mountains. Most of them didn't have the technical know-how. They got it through the Iranians, but they also got it through the Republican Guard. So I think the Houthis are weakened, but so is everyone else in Yemen. Nobody is really gaining from what is going on at the moment. And I think also the Iranians here will have to, why would they step out now? Because there is an opportunity now.
Right.
The question is, how are they going to step it up?
And yeah, is there an opportunity for someone else, possibly not the Iranians or the Saudis, to step into this crisis now and perhaps find a solution to it? We've heard of the UN being mentioned and so on, the Americans and so on. Who stands to gain, if you will, from resolving the current situation? You know,
I've been doing political and strategic analysis for so long that I'm no longer surprised by the stupidity of leaders. I mean, they just don't shock me anymore. Yeah. And I'm afraid that what happened today is going to move a good number of leaders, including the person we just heard, the leader of the Houthis, including his allies in Tehran, including the people in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and others. I think a lot of people are going to misconclude what just happened today. What just happened today is another series, another part of the series, another part of the mess, another level to the mess in Yemen that they've created. In the end of the day, Abdul Malik al-Houthi can talk about moral high grounds and about the betrayal of Ali Abdullah Saleh, but didn't he betray the people in Yemen? Wasn't that a coup against a legitimate government in Yemen? I mean, who is he to talk about moral high grounds and betrayal when he himself betrayed the Yemeni people and countless deaths since then? And who are the other people who got involved militarily, strategically, in a proxy way in the question of Yemen that can take the moral high ground. They've all destroyed Yemen, like they destroyed Syria. And they keep on concluding the wrong lessons from it. And that's what troubles me, Foley. That when you look at the situation in Yemen, you can tell, like you can tell from most other civil wars, there are no winners of civil wars. There are losers of civil war. Even those who actually can make it militarily and slaughter the other part of the population are not winners. They just killed, you know, whatever number of their own people. When you kill tens of thousands of Yemenis, you're not a Yemeni victor. You're not a Yemeni occupier. You're not a Yemeni revered leader. You are a criminal who just killed so many of your own people. And when you can see that there is a United Nations formula for a diplomatic solution based on reconciliation and based on people coming together, understanding that, excuse my disagreement, that there is a Yemen.
So many attempts at reconciliation in Yemen before, in these past decades, it never worked.
Go back to what I've just said earlier. I am stupefied. I am shocked by how leaders are so stupid. That's what history tells us. They don't learn the lessons until always it's too late. Look, you know, we know basically who's responsible for what. We know who paid the price. We don't know who's going to come on top at this point in time, because I assure you, no one is going to win Yemen, per se. I mean, no one is going to come out to say, I am the last word in Yemen and everyone else has been defeated. Neither Saudi Arabia nor Iran, nor the Houthis, nor Abdul Mansur Hadi. And of course, we know what happened to Ali Abdullah Saleh. In a question like Yemen, and I must argue because this is part of the region, even on the long term in Syria, despite the Russian intervention, in the long term in Libya, despite the Western intervention, in the end of the day, Libyans, Yemenis, Syrians, and other Arab countries, they will have to make up their minds. Are they going to live together as citizens within the one country in some sort of a modern state, albeit not too prosperous or whatever, or are they going to continue in their civil war mode? Because if they drew the conclusion from what happened today that they need to continue now to invest in the war in Yemen, Yemenis are going to suffer more, and nothing else is going to happen.
All right, stand by, Marwan and Andreas. I'm going to bring in now Mohammed Jamjoon, who's at the GCC summit in Kuwait. Regional leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council are meeting today. The foreign ministers are meeting today, and tomorrow the heads of states will meet. And Mohammed, already this GCC summit was a very crucial one because of the dispute between Qatar and Saudi Arabia and its allies. But now with these developments in Yemen, all eyes are going to be on what's going to be said there. Any reaction first to what's just happened in Yemen and the death of Ali Abdullah Saleh?
Foley, the short answer to that is no. There has not yet been any official reaction. We are awaiting to hear if there will be some statement made in this meeting of most of the foreign ministers of the GCC countries. We must remember that the foreign minister of Bahrain and the foreign minister of the UAE have not shown up this evening. They have more junior ministers there in their place. That being said, though, this was already a much more unpredictable GCC summit than we're used to because of the issue of the blockade against Qatar. Many analysts had assumed that this particular GCC summit was at the very least going to be delayed, possibly by weeks, possibly by months. They did not expect, or the conventional wisdom was not that it was actually going to happen as originally planned on December 5th and December 6th. Well, now here we are. We are on the eve of that GCC summit, although it is still not clear who all will be attending when it comes to the leaders of these countries. With regard to Yemen, though, obviously this throws a monkey wrench into what's going on right now, because it was expected, obviously, that really what was going to dominate the conversation here was going to be the Qatar crisis, trying to bring some unification to the GCC, trying to put on a brave face, trying to at least show the world and the region that this institution was not beyond repair at such a dire time. Well, now you have this happening in Yemen. Obviously, that's going to be concerning to all of the GCC countries, because this adds another complication, another layer of instability to an already very unstable region. Foley?
Mohammed Jamjoon in Kuwait City, thank you very much for that. And I want to bring in Marwan Bishara once again, our senior political analyst. As if the GCC didn't have enough to deal with already, Marwan. When Ali Abdullah Saleh extended his hand to Saudi Arabia, they seemed to welcome it. Does that line still exist now with him out of the pictures? What are the Saudis going to do in Yemen?
Well, I just heard, it's not confirmed, so, you know, we'd like usually to confirm anything before we put on air, but I just heard that the Emiratis who have Ali Abdullah Saleh's son, and I think before they had his nephew, are sending them back, and he's going to have a press conference sometime, I don't know when, today or tomorrow, as if Yemen is yet another monarchy of sort. You know, we have now already the son. It's so amazing, you know, because Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Libya, these were not supposed to be monarchies. You know, the son is not supposed to take from the father, but here you have it. So Ali Abdullah Saleh dies today, and already the son is already being promoted by a Gulf country to take his father's place,
right,
as head of the Congress party. Now, let's remind our viewers around the world that the real tragedy started here when, one, the Houthis took over by some sort of a coup, a military coup, control of Sanaa, the capital in Yemen. And then things got escalated and got worse when Saudi Arabia led a coalition because it felt that its security, Gulf security, was threatened by an Iranian-influenced coup in Yemen. The young defense minister in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, the youngest Minister of Defense in the world, at 32, ordered the invasion of a neighboring country before he went on his honeymoon. And I don't think he thought through the circumstances. And he didn't think through the scenarios. And certainly, it appears to me, he did not think through the exit strategy. When you order an invasion of a neighboring country at 32, a country like Yemen, a very, very complex country, you would think that you would have some sort of an exit strategy or some sort of a political solution to put on the table once you do whatever maneuvers you did. We are now in the end of the third year of the war that was launched in, March 2014. 2015, sorry. So we're in the end of the third year of the war. And so what is the result? The result is disease, death, and destruction, countless number of people.
Right.
So the GCC has a responsibility fully. The GCC has a certain responsibility, moral, political, and humane for what is happening in Yemen. And I think, I would hope, that tomorrow the leaders of the GCC countries will step to the plate and will offer hope for Yemen in the form of a diplomatic initiative of sort,
right,
or anything that resembles
it's interesting
hope for Yemen.
Because, you know, one of the phrases that's making the rounds on social media today is that Saudi Arabia's plan B in Yemen has also failed. What is going to be plan C in your view, Andreas? Is there going to be a clearer Saudi Emirati policy going forward now that Ali Abdullah Saleh is out of the picture?
I mean, they lost their big joker. I mean, yesterday it looked like they had a new joker to play, and it seemed like an easy exit strategy, you know, a face-saving measure to get out of this quagmire of this war in Yemen that the Saudis are desperate to get out of because they can't afford it anymore. The Yemenis are the Emiratis are in a slightly more comfortable situation here because they are based in the south. They have really secured Aden. You know, they have built up a militia which is relatively robust. They're well equipped. They're not involved in the quagmire and the infighting that's going on in the north in Sanaa at the moment. So for them, you know, they've secured their objective in Yemen. The Saudis haven't secured their objective. They haven't secured the southern border. They haven't really eliminated the missile threat as they claimed in 2015. They haven't achieved any of the objectives. As Marwan said, has never been a Saudi strategy for Yemen, and there's definitely no strategy with MBS. Mohammed bin Salman is someone who doesn't do things with strategies, quite impulsive. So he will now have to sit back, return to the drawing board and say, what could we possibly do to get out of this quagmire? At the moment, I don't know what kind of opportunities would create themselves. I think there is it might be an attempt by the UAE to promote Ahmed Saleh, who is his son, because he's been in the Emirates for a long time, but has been under house arrest. I'm not sure how much of a willing player he wants to be for the Emirates here. Big question mark. But you know, you can't create another hereditary system. This is not how Yemen works, and definitely not. That's not how the GPC works. So I really don't think that this is going to work.
Just a point of clarification on the United Arab Emirates.
Right.
You know, for 6 months now, we've been talking about why the GCC countries accuse Qatar of punching above its weight, and Qatar did punch above its weight, thankfully, for questions of Arab Spring, for questions of promoting humanitarian, democratic, whatever processes in various Arab countries. But look at the United Arab Emirates. It's involved in everything we just heard. It's involved in Yemen, including secret prisons, including militias, including taking over certain parts of Yemen,
So
being responsible for the escalation.
Yeah.
But not just Yemen. They've been involved in Libya. It turned out that they've also been involved in Syria. It turned out in Eritrea. And of what we heard just the last couple of days, they've been involved with the Russians and the Americans in some secret talks.
What is the Emiratis' objective here?
Well, it's like objective for a lot of small countries with a lot of money is to project influence. And there are young, industrious leaders in the United Arab Emirates who are trying to project power in various parts of the region and apparently the world. Because why would you mediate between the Trump team and the Russians when no one else would want to do that in some faraway island that you have a number of hotels? It's kind of weird. But be that as it may, the whole punching above one's weight, it really backfires when it does involve the livelihood and the actual lives of people in Yemen. So the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia need at this point in time to recollaborate, recalculate what just went down. And now that their last ally of sort, Ali Abdullah Saleh, is gone, if they're going to try to revive his son to be his successor and try to go again to another 3-year cycle of war, that would be a complete tragedy, not just for Yemen, but also for the region.
All right, you mentioned the Trump administration, Marwan, and I want to bring in